All right. How's it going, guys?
Good.
Hey,
We're here for episode 2. So let's go ahead and start chatting. Anybody have anything you want to share this week in light of the content we plan on discussing?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
That's so exciting, Levi.
Yeah. I've been working with a guy recently and just talking to him about some of these concepts has been very interesting. He's a pastor's kid and good dude for a lot of reasons, but he definitely doesn't have the same background with like the red pill and everything. So it's been a good set of conversations we've had, and he's been pretty receptive to it. So I'm kind of interested to see if any of that comes up today as well. Some of the things we've been talking about.
Very cool.
Yeah, just over the weekend, I was talking to an acquaintance, and the famed "happy wife, happy life" comment came up, and you just
press F.
You kind of, it's almost like getting punched in the gut, and you have to kind of just keep rolling with it,
Yeah, there's a future show conversation right there. How do you deal with people saying ridiculous things in church or around you, and how do you respond to that without losing your brain?
Well, that's part of the topic today. So if we're talking about archetypes of different guys, and we've already shared last week who we are as a group of people, and Patrick's not able to be with us tonight, but hopefully we will be able to keep it lighthearted and fun. But we're going to talk today about different archetypes of guys and women, how things go in the church, how things go in marriages, etc. I think the happy wife, happy life conundrum that many guys find themselves in is really a huge relational dynamic and archetype itself that should be covered. So why don't you tell us the story about how that came up?
Oh, it's just a couple guys, and we were talking about. I think I had mentioned something. I had a project I wanted to catch up on, and a couple. The other fellow said something to the effect, "Yeah, he's got quite a bit on his honey-do list." The other cringe comment, and then it was, "Oh yeah, you got to keep the peace, happy life, happy wife, happy life." And I'm just sitting there nodding my head, okay.
I think the great irony of the people who say that thing typically don't have the happy life part of it or the happy wife part of it.
It's totally not. It's a misnomer. It's that mission of trying to please their wife, which is not doesn't end up pleasing them. It's a dichotomy that doesn't get fulfilled.
Yeah, every time I've come across a phrase like that, or I have a buddy, really cool guy, just came to Christ, and he's like, "Oh, I gotta check with the wife first before I do this," or I don't think my wife can survive without me. And those are good things for future conversations. I haven't asked with this particular guy, but historically, when I've dug a little deeper, like, oh, is that actually working for you? It's like they double down and they're like, oh yeah, life is great. And I'm like, really? All this sex you ever want at the quality you want? And they're like, more than enough. I'm happy with it. And I'm just like, I know this is just your ego in play right now. And then I have no idea. It's pretty much a moot conversation at that point.
Yeah, I remember not too long ago, I was at a bachelor party I was doing last year for a buddy of mine who got married. Fun time. And at one point, one of the guys, who was a mutual college friend who happened to be there, started quoting the happy wife, happy life comment. And I just kind of snickered at him and like, yeah, I'm sure. How's that working out for you? And, of course, he gives the same garbage of like, oh, yeah, it seems to be doing great. I'm having a good time. I'm like, well, that's fine. I just don't see it as necessarily biblical. And then I point out, some of the very low hanging fruit as to easy things that the Bible talks through, and especially about how Jesus, of course, focuses on having his wife merited toward his glory, not necessarily that he's pining over ours. Not to say that he doesn't want the glorification of the church. He definitely wants a brilliant bride ready for walking down the aisle and all that. But at the same time, he ended up being just ferociously opposed to me. He got really angry. And so it was one of the first times that I had to deal with like blatant anger in an in-person conversation. Usually you hear it from all the bloops on Reddit. It's a little easier for people behind their keyboard to start fighting back. But when you get somebody in person and you can see the red in their face just building up, it's entertaining to watch. And so ironically, it was, I guess this was a couple of years ago, but it was within a week after that is when the Desiring God blog, John Piper, posted its article on how the Christian myths about marriage are wrong, and happy wife, happy life was one of the myths that they debunked. And I was pretty pleased by that because this guy was a big John Piper fan. So I'm like, hey, your own buddy is backing me up here.
Oh man. Yeah, when you get nailed by something Piper's blog post out that way, that's you're definitely doing something wrong.
Oh, how the tables have turned.
Mm-hmm. Not to say that it was Piper himself who wrote that one, but and I do like a lot of what Piper has to say. There's a lot I don't like too.
I feel like Piper is almost the Jordan B. Peterson of the Bible. He's close, but he's just off by a smidge.
Yeah, I think that's a vast overestimation of Piper's relevance to anything cultural, frankly.
So you guys were talking about never mind, I'll move on to that another time. But let's go back. What other types of guys do you see out in the world that are that your heart breaks for, or if not that your heart breaks for them, but that you just want to look and laugh?
I posted about this a little while ago with some vignettes of different guys I've encountered, and I think the one I see maybe the most in the church is just the nice guy. I mean, the simple, plain, like, wants to do the right thing, listens to everything the pastor says. It's just too bad the pastor's telling him things like happy wife, happy life, telling him to do chore play, telling him all the wrong things, and he's doing them eagerly. He wants to take action. It's just entirely the wrong action. And he is just complete beta, but a praised beta by the church, by his pastors, by his elders, by his peers. Meanwhile, he's suffering from largely a sexless marriage. Wife is totally not aroused by him whatsoever. She's frustrated with him. It's just falling apart, but he thinks he's doing everything right. And so that's the guy that my heart goes out for, because if you come along and say, hey, dude, you're doing everything wrong, he can point to all the pastors, all the theologians, all of the Christian pundits and say, but I'm doing all these things. Who are you to say otherwise? And so that's where it gets back to, okay, now I guess we're going to have to do the long way, which is let's go, verse and paragraph and go figure out actually what's going on here. But at the same time, often then it's your interpretation versus their pastors, and guess what? You lose. So there they go, spinning off into this, very depressing situation. And then, more often than not, it's the wife who ends up either ending things or pushing the eject button in some catastrophic way and steps out of the marriage. And, those guys don't see it coming, even though they're creating every condition for that type of behavior to pop up.
Yeah. And then throughout that process, as she's withdrawing, he's thinking that he has to double down and invest even more in what she wants, and maybe it's monetary projects or attention, and that's just actually having the exact opposite as he pulls away from from what semblance of a mission he has, and invests more and more in her, what he thinks is her interest, to try to affect her pleasure and her passion. It's in fact driving her away.
Yeah, that was the part of No More Mr. Nice Guy that resonated with me the most, was when he commented on how the nice guy's strategy is, if he notices his strategy is failing, instead of changing his strategy, he doubles down and says, I'm going to be even nicer than I was before, twice as nice. And that's the advice that the church gives. And that's what I remember a number of pastors who had tried to tell me that, well, if you're having marriage problems, it's because you're not being nice enough to your wife, and you just need to love her more, and eventually she'll come around. It just doesn't work. And so
you're not communicating enough. You know her love language.
Oh, her love language.
yeah.
Oh, geez. Yeah, and I think part of it too is like it sets up covert contract over covert contract, and I think that Christians in general are kind of prone to doing this. And I don't know if it's like some sort of like import from a works-based salvation, baggage or something like that a lot of Christians seem to walk around with. But it's kind of almost the same mentality of if I just do these things, then I'll hit the jackpot, then this thing will happen, and it ends up being just this like huge covert contract that ends up just causing them a huge deal of misery. And so, I think there's some sort of parallel going on there.
That's why I love what Robert Glover says in No More Mr. Nice Guy, where he talks about this. And he says, most people think the jerks are the manipulative ones, but in reality, it's the nice guys who are the manipulative ones, because they're the ones trying to use their nicehood as a way to say, hey, I did this for you. Now you have to do that for me. And they think that they are owed something, and that their niceness is then a huge manipulation tactic. And when they don't get it accomplished, then they revert to passive aggressiveness, cold shoulders, silent treatments, or sometimes even just flat out screaming and yelling, because in their mind they're thinking, I'm owed this, but she's not giving it to me. Why is she not succumbing to my manipulation that I never even told her I'm trying to do in the first place?
Yeah.
Resort to everything but healthy assertive communication.
Well, and I think there's a huge resistance from a lot of Christian women to this as well, where they have it where they want the nice guy, or they say they do, but I think the problem is there's this assumption that women know what they want, and that's one of the areas where I think that the church has done a huge disservice to guys, is to over rationalize the behavior and the ideas and the words of women, where they say, well, ask her what she wants. And the thing is she doesn't know more often than not, because she'll say, I want you to help out with X, Y, Z. I want you to, do all these beta sort of behaviors. And in reality, those are the things that are also driving her away. And then, they'll cry to their girlfriends and they'll say, oh my gosh, he's, this guy who's a chump who I just am not attracted to at all, even though he's doing exactly what she's asking him to do, which is exactly why he's a chump.
So I just had that exact conversation with my wife this weekend, where I was out mowing the lawn. My sister was over, and my son had thrown something in the middle of the yard right in front of where the mower was. So I yell at him to come get it out of the way. And of course I'm speaking loudly because the mower's running. And my wife comes out there and gets all huffy, and you shouldn't talk to our son that way. I'm like, just keeping my mouth shut. And later on, I just confronted her sternly about that, saying, hey, I've got the situation covered. You don't need to get involved. We're good. And then she, of course, decides that she's going to get all huffy and upset about it. And she doesn't like the way that I can hold and maintain like a positive, happy demeanor, especially since my sister was over. I'm like, I'm not going to let you ruin my time with my sister. I'm going to have a good time. If you want to come over here and have fun with us, I'm going to be over there. And if not, that's your choice. And so that's exactly what I did. She goes up to her room to sulk for a while. And then about 15 minutes later, I get a text message, and she's apologizing left and right. She's like, I don't know what came over me. I should not have talked to you that way. And ultimately makes the conclusion of what you guys were just saying. And she said, I've really been thinking a lot about our marriage. And as much as I at times will be very critical or judgmental, when I stop and think about it, I realize if you were everything I think I want in a man, I would totally hate my life. And so it's kind of cool when she starts to get it. And then she turns around and she says, you are not culturally normal. And I have to be okay with that. And I am okay with that. And I'm so glad I married you. I'm so happy that you're my husband and not those other guys down the street who just want to focus on watering their grass and watching sports. She said, I would be so bored, but for some reason when I see it, I think that's what I want. So this idea, I mean, you don't get very many conversations where it plays out so bluntly. Now, my wife is incredibly intelligent, so she is able to self-analyze and figure out what's really going on. It probably helps that she's read a lot of my stuff on RPC, probably still does. And so she knows to some degree some of the theory behind it. But anyway, just a more recent story where, from my own wife's mouth, she's acknowledging, even I know that I don't know what I want. And if I got what I did want out of you, then I would hate my life, was essentially what she was saying.
Yep. I've had similar conversations where, for whatever reason, situation comes up, I tell her my opinion. This is what if there's disagreement in the moment, many times to come back around and said, wow, I'm so glad that you said what you did and we did what we did, because it turned out so much better than I thought. And I know that sometimes I don't always support it right there in the moment, but geez, you've been right more than I can even possibly count. So, basically, thank you for putting up with me questioning you on these things. And what's funny is she has a lot of girlfriends who tell her that they wish their husband was more like that, and wish that he wouldn't just go along, because ultimately women don't like making tough decisions. They don't like having to choose which fork in the road to take, and they resent their men who make them make that decision. I mean, hey guy, you got to be right. That's a big burden of command to bear right there. But at the same time, if you put it on your wife to decide, and I see a lot of guys do that, we'll try and do the egalitarian thing. Like, we're going to come up with a mutual decision here, which is ultimately abandoning the field, abandoning the decision, and putting a lot of the responsibility on her shoulders. And she just ends up resenting him for it. So yeah, I think just to your point, in the moment, sometimes it can be a bit of a pain in the butt. And it's like, well, why are you even making an issue out of this? You never have before. But then downstream, I would say often it turns out where, they appreciate it.
Yep.
When are we going to see that post there, Oz? Burden of command. Sounds so amazing.
Oh, man, yeah, that's back in my long list of half-finished, or even maybe that's too ambitious, like quarter-finished posts. There's some good ones in there, I promise.
Oh my goodness. I'll be looking forward to it. I feel like that's going to be a pretty gold one. Maybe even sidebar material.
Maybe.
Could be. So Oz, there's a statement. Oh, go ahead.
One other thing that kind of while you guys were talking, I have a buddy who constantly has these covert contracts with his wife. His relationship with his wife just completely, his whole emotional world revolves around her. Like, any chance to hang out with her, he's like, I'm there. And he had a discussion with a senior pastor, and pastor was like, oh, well, you just need to forgive her more. Like, which I get, but it also made him double down the wrong direction of being nicer and then forgiving her when she does make mistakes that shouldn't be continued in the relationship. So
this is the problem where you get unilateral advice, where something like that's not bad advice, right? Expanding on your ability to forgive people is a great thing, but not when you give that advice to the exclusion of other necessary advice that would preclude the situation from ever occurring where you need to forgive her again in the first place.
Yeah. It's like, basically, from my understanding, it was giving her a free pass to do anything you want.
Correct.
So I'm in the process of working towards presenting No More Mr. Nice Guy to him. Okay, what were you saying, John?
Oh, I was going back. So Oz was talking earlier about the idea of how so many men in the church are committed to their beta strategies. And I know that there's a lot of conversation over what does it mean to be alpha versus beta. And I know that Rollo has a fun post where he tries to define alpha as this video that he calls the guy who's the king of alpha, or the epitome of alpha, or something, where the guy has this party while his parents are gone and the news reporters are saying, you totally destroyed your house. What are you going to do about this? And he's like, I don't care, whatever. Right. But
Corey.
In that, yeah, that guy. So in that post, Rollo starts talking about how defining alpha is difficult because every single person wants to define it in a slightly different way that always seems to match their own characteristic and attributes to make themselves feel like they are alpha. And so it constantly gets redefined based on whoever the guy is who's trying to define it. And so he tries to put a more, I guess, less biased rubric over how to define the concept of alpha. And I remember even my own brother having this conversation before he was getting married. And talking to him about some wedding prep stuff. Here's some things you need to be thinking about, how to run your home and whatnot. And as soon as I got into anything with alpha beta dynamic, he immediately jumps in. Oh, I am alpha. I definitely know how to be the alpha in the house. And he is like the most beta guy I've ever seen. Sorry, brother, if you're watching this. I've had this conversation with you already before. Now, he may be growing, but at the same time, and I don't fault him either, because that's how I was when I first got married, right? And so we all go through that. And I'm hoping that he continues to learn and grow out of that. My point is to say that when it comes to these archetypes, and you talk about guys who double down on beta strategies, the problem is that they think that they really are alpha, right? They don't recognize, nobody raises their hand and says, oh yes, I'm a proud beta, right? I mean, you might get guys who say, I'm a proud social justice warrior, I'm a proud white knight, whatever. But nobody says, oh, I'm definitely beta, and I love being a beta. It just doesn't happen. So how do you reach a guy who doesn't realize what his problems are?
I think this kind of is one of the hallmarks of the red pill, whether it's, sexual strategy red pill, if it's political red pill, whatever. You can't force anyone to take it, right? So I think there has to be kind of a receptivity to begin with, because if somebody's committed to the idea that they're an alpha and they're just a career beta and that's all they've ever been so far, and they still think they're alpha, like, you're not going to be able to demonstrate that away for them. I think that's kind of one of those kick the dust off your sandals and move on to the next town situations, because I think that your energy is better spent to people who are more receptive. Now, if somebody indicates a certain level of receptivity to the concept and isn't going to dig their heels into the idea that, oh yeah, no, I am actually a totally alpha, I think then it's talking about like, okay, what is an alpha? And I think maybe that's kind of the question you're driving at here, is like, where do we draw the line? How do we define the term? And I think it's kind of one of those ethereal topics that's very difficult to put down in a succinct 3-sentence definition. I think one of the definitions I like, and I think this is Jack Donovan's, but if you want to know which guy's the alpha, if the guy's talking down to the other guy like he's his kid brother, he's the alpha. And I think that a lot of it has to do with that command of respect structure. And I think that you're actually kind of talking about two different concepts: alpha among men and alpha perceived by women. I think those are actually two slightly different things, because it's
dive into
really,
that.
So I think it's really hard to fake being an alpha among men, because I think the whole point around the whole alpha beta thing ultimately is around how men organize in hierarchies, and guys always do, no matter what. Guys always organize in hierarchy, and that's basically, hey, thanks to that we have civilization. That's cool. I think women perceive alpha as the guy who they think is the top guy. He may not actually be the top guy. Guys will know if he's a top guy or not, but the girl that will perceive him as the top guy is often the alpha. Now, that doesn't explain the Corey phenomenon, so I don't think that's a complete definition. I think maybe the other definition that I would kind of throw out there is the whole you're your own mental point of origin type of idea. Are you making decisions out of your own volition, or are you making decisions based on the external pressures of people, society, or otherwise? And I think if you are making your own decisions under your own frame, that's ultimately what boils down to a definition of alpha that I think works in most cases.
Yeah, the latter is the way that I've usually viewed it myself. I know that I usually conceptualize it, even though I know it's not the greatest definition ever, is the guy who knows what he wants in life and goes for it and doesn't let other people stand in the way.
That's a pretty good definition. That would be close to the hero archetype there, over the overcomer, the hero of the story, overcoming obstacles.
See, I think that I like the definition in theory, but I think that so many people ultimately don't know what they want, yet
Correct.
Can still be alpha, so they may not have any kind of like long-term vision, but it's what they want in the moment too. So like the Corey phenomenon, that dude knew what he wanted and he was making decisions regardless of external pressure, clearly. And so It's that he was making his own decisions and bearing whatever consequences may come, based on his own wishes, desires, etc., that I think would qualify him, I guess, under that alpha category. And I think that if we look back at some of the guys we've talked about in terms of that archetype you see in the church of he wants to please his wife. He's the consummate beta who's constantly, trying to win his wife's affection, etc. All of his behavior is ultimately driven by her opinion of him, or his pastor's opinion of him, or whatever opinion he thinks is more important than his own or God's. That's what's driving his behavior. And that is like definitionally beta behavior, is making decisions based on other people's input. I mean, now granted, a lot of people work and they have jobs that are very like high performing, what we consider alpha jobs, and they have a boss who tells them what to do. Well, guess who's the alpha in that relationship? The boss.
So let me ask this question, and I'll leave this more openly to everybody. Is there a difference between the alpha beta dynamic and the red blue dynamic? And I think we just lost Dusty or Dross.
He might be dialing in. He was having a really spotty connection.
That's all right.
Alpha beta.
If he rejoins us, he'll rejoin us. But is there a difference between the alpha beta dynamic versus the red blue dynamic? What is that distinction? Because I feel like some guys tend to cross over and mix them up and think, oh, well, I'm an alpha, therefore I'm red pilled and you're not.
I guess, yeah, the more I think about it, and initially I use them pretty synonymously, but then in a healthy long-term relationship, you need a balance of alpha and beta behaviors in order to maintain a healthy relationship. And so in the red pill sphere, like red pill and blue pill usually imply like if you're blue pill, you're all blue pill, or almost all blue pill and a little red pill, and vice versa. If you're red pill, you're like all alpha, no beta. So that's kind of the dichotomy that I see.
Yeah. So I guess the way I've looked at it is the red blue dynamic is how you see the world. The alpha beta dynamic is what you do in the world. And so I think that you can have somebody who's doing the right things and is performing, I guess, functionally as an alpha, but still has a very blue view of the world. So like one of the guys I've known since high school is extraordinarily successful with women in terms of being able to attract them, because he demonstrates a lot of alpha characteristics, yet still has a very blue-pilled, very kind of over-romanticized view of what that dynamic should look like and idealizes, and even doesn't recognize a lot of what's happening between him and the women that are attracted to him. So I would say that even though he is like functionally very alpha, he has a very blue-pilled view of the world. And I think that can also happen in reverse. I think we see tons of guys who have a very like red-pilled is understanding of the social dynamics between men and women, but then are still functionally highly beta in their behavior because it hasn't become internalized to come out in their behavior. And so I think there is a variation, although I think that there's still a lot of correlation.
Is what you're describing there, Oz, is that called purple pill?
Yeah, I think not quite. So I think when I would say the purple pill is somebody who has a very blue-pilled or red-pilled starting point, who wants to integrate what they see as the best of the other viewpoint. So it's either the blue-pilled beta guy who, or maybe even alpha guy, but just somebody who believes that things should be, very over Disney romanticized, but then wants to use certain aspects of the red pill to get what they want out of a relationship, or vice versa. Somebody maybe is super red pilled, they understand totally what women are like, and then wants to still somehow use some parts of the blue pill fantasy as a way to accomplish what they view in life as a romantic end of some kind. So I think the purple pill is really when you're conflating knowledge and ideology. I think that in behavior you see more of an oscillation between like alpha behavior, beta behavior. I don't know if there's such a thing really as blue pilled behavior. I'm sorry, purple pilled behavior.
I would agree with that.
Makes sense.
So in talking about different types of marriages and guys that we see around, Jack 10 of Hearts, God rest his soul, I wish he was still around. I don't know why he quit Reddit or what happened to him, but he has this fantastic post that every guy should be aware of called The 3 Dysfunctional Captains and First Officers of Married TRP. So I'm assuming you guys are familiar with that. Does anybody want to share kind of their experience either in their own relationships or with people that they've seen with the different types of captains, and what the problems are, and if the solutions he's got there are correct? What do y'all think of that?
So, for the benefit of anyone listening, the three kind of main captains that he brings out in this post are the drunk captain with a pissed off first officer who has to take command, the captain and the constantly complaining passenger, and finally, let's see, I know it's down in the comments somewhere, the captain and her husband. So basically the woman who is functionally the captain. So great post, like you said, definitely worth a read, but for those who haven't, that hopefully gets everybody up to speed.
It's a good summary. I have never been married, so I've seen it in other relationships though.
Yeah, I really identified with the archetype of the drunk captain. Just years ago, my marriage, deferring to her decisions, or just around the house, like when I would get home, just fall into that trap of, okay, I'm in relaxed time, and let her, she would have to tell me that projects need to be done, or this needs to be taken care of, rather than coming home and being that new mindset that I am of, I'm at my second job now. I'm at home, and I gotta be on point and kill it at home. So the drunk captain was what resonated with me when I read that. It's like, yeah, that I knew that guy.
Mm-hmm. So what helped you?
Oh, finding this for sure. Reading a number of these books. No More Mr. Nice Guy was definitely number one book to internalize and read. I think I've actually when I say read, listened. Most of everything that I've consumed on this journey has been through Audible, but I think I've actually listened to No More Mr. Nice Guy 3 times.
Wow.
So, but yeah, shifting your mindset from like, okay, I'm home, and I'm going to relax, and I'm looking for that recliner, or got to wait till I get nagged 3 times to to mow the yard, or do this or that. Not that I was incredibly lazy or anything, but just shifting that mindset to be killing it at home. Like, there's projects to be done. There's, this needs to be picked up around the house. Just kind of like Mel Gibson from We Were Soldiers. Your boots are the first one on the ground, and their last ones to leave the ground.
Well, I'll kind of jump in here a little bit here. Oh, okay. I guess I'll keep going.
Sorry, Levi, you're breaking up real bad. We'll let Oz take it.
Cool. So I think my kind of red pill journey probably follows a little bit along the line of the drunk captain archetype, largely because it was like the kind of idea is you started alpha and then kind of went beta, and then your wife is upset because she didn't marry a beta, she married a guy to be an alpha. And so part of my journey was really learning how to socialize well, how to do the pickup artist thing initially. And when I met my wife, I was pretty adept at the attraction component of the social dynamic and really running my own life. Like, I was very self-independent, pretty well established career wise, etc. And she found that very attractive. And then kind of following the common advice that you find in church, it was basically you get married and now you have to operate as a beta, as an equal, whatever. And that started to wear on the marriage. And it's like, it became clear to me after a while, and it's what ultimately drove me to the red pill, is this is not what she signed up for. And that's true. Like, that's not who I was when we got married. So it seemed like a pretty clear answer to, hey, by the way, the things that you attracted her with are the things that are going to keep her attracted by and large. And so then it was, I actually remember reading this post at that point, and thinking, yeah, okay, that hits me pretty well. I'm gonna go ahead and start curbing this before it gets any worse. So more like the tipsy captain, if that's a way to take it, but it still fits the general archetype. And then just kind of commenting further down at the captain and her husband, that's the archetype that I really see a lot of in the church. And when I think about a lot of my friends' marriages that are either harder than they should be, or struggling, or have fallen apart, it really, I think, boils down to that dynamic more than anything else. And actually, John, you had posted a link to one of my early posts on RPC earlier about the basically the dangers of having a high SM sexual market value wife, and I think that's really what that runs into. That it plays really well at the post here on the captain and her husband, where these guys get totally in over their heads, and the wife recognizes that and ultimately resents them for it. And that's a hard fix because you have a huge SMV disparity to close. And I mean, fortunately, you kind of have time on your side in the sense that you're getting hopefully more attractive as time goes on, and hers is kind of fizzling out. But talk about a wasted opportunity.
How long did that take you for going from, tipsy captain to sober captain, would you say?
It was pretty quick to reap most of the benefits, I guess, in the change. I think there's a pretty marked difference about 6 months in, and by a year in, I think it was a pretty good, notable change that we had made in just the marriage and dynamic in general, mostly because I took it really seriously and took action really quickly. And this was a pattern of behavior that I had already largely engaged in, had just kind of fallen away from. So it's not like I was totally starting from the ground up. It was more of a remodel, sort of, so to speak. So I don't think there was quite as much work to be done. I don't anticipate for most people it goes that quickly. I mean, there's a huge amount of trust that is blown by the time you get too far down this road. And to say, hey, no, I've got this, you're going to have to prove it. And there's going to be a lot of testing along the way because they're not going to believe you for good reason. And like, that's normal part of the process. And I think a lot of guys who go in and they go hard, they go, oh my gosh, my wife is worse than when I started this. This doesn't work. When in reality, it's working. And that's why she's giving you more tests. That's why she's pushing back on things more, because she's not willing to cede control or her perceived control over to just some chump. You've got to prove it again. And I think that my advantage was that I had been, pretty functionally the captain for quite a while leading up to that. So it was, again, a pattern behavior I could kind of readopt less than I had to totally begin anew.
So did you guys go through like marriage counseling where you kind of where the
hell no?
Yes. Like, why would you say that you diverted to that behavior and started, I don't know if you were deferring to like her leadership, or I know you're definitely deferring to the advice from that the church usually gives men to love your wives and give up your whole life for her,
Yeah, the sad answer, the reason why things were going that direction is because I was believing what the church was telling me.
Okay.
I mean, if we want to run down the list of books that I read during that time and how helpful they were, I mean, we can. But I'll tell you, they're not. I mean, okay, so 5 Love Languages. I've still got 2 copies that have lugged around all these moves all the way, across the states here. And I don't know why I've kept them, but if anything, those were not helpful. I mean, it kind of can give you some vocabulary as far as expressing what your covert contracts are, but it doesn't necessarily help you in terms of achieving anything. So that's, part of it. And that was recommended to us by somebody that I respect in the church. Probably one of the worst ones from just a pure sexual standpoint is Intended for Pleasure. That book is a heaping pile of garbage. It should be like, too. Oh, it's awful. I've wanted to go back and reread it and write kind of a critique of it. I just can't bring myself at this point to go back and reread it because it is so awful in terms of its advice. And so you just, Real Marriage by Mark Driscoll, garbage. Probably the worst of them was, I think it's, I want to say it's like Redeeming Marriage by Tim Keller. I'd have to look up the title on that one.
So
and initially
I haven't read.
It's one that I think at first blush, it seemed like, and this is again, reading it through a lens that didn't have all the red pill categories to kind of think through things. It seemed like it was a fairly helpful work, and it was well recommended by like all the guys in the church I was going to at the time. And looking back on some of the content there, it's pretty unhelpful. And if anything, it causes a lot more misunderstanding than anything else. So, I mean, to answer your question, Levi, I think it really comes down to, I was doing the things trying to improve a marriage that I was already good. So I think long story short is to follow advice of other guys in the church to try and fix a marriage. But really, I wanted to make the best marriage possible. Like, we started from a good place. And when people come along and say, hey, this is how you make a great marriage, that's what I was trying to do. It just turns out they were handing me not red pills, but like cyanide pills, and they unwittingly were doing things that were sabotaging, or giving me material, I should say, that was undermining to the marriage. And so I started adopting some of those. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you ask them if they were getting laid regularly like they want before you accepted that device, or did you just do what every guy does and like, oh, well, you've been married for XYZ years, you say you're happy, so it must be right?
Yeah, I mean, I basically would say like, well, how's your marriage? And they say like, oh, I'm super happy in my marriage, which I took like, hey, yeah, you're getting laid regularly, and you're like your king or something. I assume that was all positive things. And I knew them well enough to see enough of their marriage to say like, it seems like you have some good stuff going on, and they'd been married for a long time. And I think that I assumed duration meant quality, and not making the maybe obvious connection that guys can endure a lot of terrible circumstances for a really, really long time. That duration does not necessarily equate to equality. It didn't occur to me that maybe their marriages weren't all they were cracked up to be. And I don't even now, looking back on it, since before I really adopted the red pill, I moved away from that area, and so I hadn't followed up with those guys as closely. I couldn't say if their marriages were really great or not. There's a couple of them that, looking back on and seeing how things have folded since then, I can say they weren't. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is I had assumed that duration was a good indicator of a good marriage.
Yeah.
So what was an example of some of that poisonous advice that was in one of those books? And what was an example of what they were telling you to do?
Yeah, let's see. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and start with like intended for pleasure. And it's been a long time since I read it, but one of the things it talks about in there, the author of the book, he is firmly convinced of the idea that sexual response is completely tied up in like certain stimulus. So for example, he is all against using any kind of sex toy, for example, because if a woman climaxes based on a sex toy, then you're not going to cut it with your, hunk of meat or anything like that. Like you're just not going to be able to produce the same sensations. So you're setting your wife up for failure down the road for that. And for the same reasons, he's against any kind of like oral sex or basically anything that's not penis and vagina sex, which really... Yeah, basically, I think personal anecdotes as to why he believes those things. And he comes at it from a quasi, and I say quasi with like big air quotes or whatever, scientific perspective. So it seems, I guess, on the surface, like he guy knows something. But in reality, it's like, here's a vanilla sex life. This is what you can sign up for. This is what's going to ultimately work for you. And it's like, that is not a particularly interesting or dynamic set of skills that leaves you with, if you want to try and keep things interesting or keep pushing the boundaries and explore the depths and possibilities, that's not going to get you there. So I was surprised at how highly recommended that book was. And there's certain, and I won't say too much beyond this because it has been so long since I've read it, but I remember him specifically denying certain sensational phenomenon that turns out actually do happen. And it was like, wow, this guy's so far off base that if somebody took this and read it and believed it, they would have a completely limited sex life unnecessarily. So that was one of them.
That was me.
Yeah, and you know what? I am glad that even though initially I kind of was like, oh yeah, this makes some sense. Down the road, I was like, you know what? this is garbage. And, based on my own history before getting married, I had a feeling that some of it, I knew some of it was definitely beyond what was credible, but we got past that in some pretty major ways. So that ended up being not as much of an issue. As far as like the toxic advice on more of like a blue pill or beta sort of dynamic, I think a lot of it just comes down to the theological orientation of what your wife, who she is to you, and what that actually means. So the idea that she's a helpmate is a biblical concept. The idea that she is, the analogy, the husband, wife, church, bride analogy in Ephesians 5, there's a lot of talk about that in the theological circles of the churches that I tend to attend. And basically the idea of husbands lay down your wives or your lives as Christ loves the church, that whole idea is construed as basically men, because Christ went so far in serving his bride, he would die on a cross for her. You have to do everything up to that point for her in serving her in her mission. And so your mission becomes
the same sermon or something.
Yeah, right. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this, because ultimately what that does is it flips the entire point of that verse on its head, and it says, oh, hey man, you're supposed to lead, and here's how you lead. You lead her in following her mission, and by leading you submit, and because servant leadership is the thing, and so you servant lead your way into being her helpmate, and so it completely inverts the man-wife dynamic as established by God. And I think that by far was the most toxic of all of the different dynamics, because where do you start with that? You have to let go of your mission, which is probably the number one thing a Christian guy ought to be focused on, especially if we won't take any kind of credibility, the idea of, having your own kind of volition, will, mental point of origin, if you will, from, an alpha standpoint. But even beyond that, to assume that your wife has this big grand mission that she needs help with to begin with is a misunderstanding. I mean, most women don't. And when you say, okay, honey, what's your mission? What would just get you the most tickles out of life? What will make you so excited, make your heart sing? I want to help you with that. Like, it kind of sounds good to them at first, but then the answer is like, I really want to start a book club. Okay. So now I'm going to reorient my life, and your book club is lit. Panties dropped.
I always loved it. At one point I was in a conversation with my wife, and we're talking about, I think it was in the midst of an argument, and she asked at one point, well, why are you even with me? I don't remember what my answer was off the top of my head, but whatever it was, it seemed to get through the conversation. I asked her that back in return, said, okay, well, I've answered your question. Why are you with me? And her answer was, well, there are a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, I know that we're going to be standing before God on Judgment Day, and everybody's going to have to give an account. And after you give your account, God's going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. And I want to be the girl standing next to you saying, I helped him do it.
That seems like a pretty good argument.
It's about the best answer I could have thought of.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really good.
Zach, as you were talking there, so if also to our audience, if anybody's listening to this and you want to make a lot of money, here's a great idea. Become like an Instagram or a YouTube personality where you give short little red pill comedy sermon snippets just over the top, and that would be great. Like, you have a warm audience. I would endorse you. I'd be like, that's great, guys. Everybody in the community, if you want to laugh, here's some common Christianity tropes. Also, it sounds like they're
clever enough to know how to think of those.
It sounds like there needs to be Intended for Pleasure 2.0, the sex god version or something. I'm not married, so it's gonna be a while before I can come up with that. But any of you, I feel like Oz, you and John could coordinate something.
In my long list of posts that may or may not see the light of day, I've at least got one toward that end. So stay tuned.
Okay, it's a race, bro. once I'm married, I'm gonna give it a few years to get into like the really kinky stuff that takes, you know, months. If you guys haven't banged anything out by then, I'm just gonna be like, well, you know, somebody needs to do it. Might as well.
Oh man.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up for today. Does anybody else have anything last minute they'd like to add on the concept of common pitfalls that I guess most of our listeners are likely to fall into?
This is one that I don't know if there was a post about it or one that has just come up a lot. And I know, John, you've kind of taken the same perspective, but apologizing is something that is seen as highly beta. And generally speaking, I think that men do it wrong in a way that undermines themselves. And so, you know, repentance is part of the Christian life, obviously, but repentance is not synonymous with apology. So if I screw the pooch and I do something wrong and I know I messed up, it's not, hey, wife, I'm so sorry. I messed up. Will you please forgive me? First of all, forgiveness comes from God primarily. Second of all, it's much more effective, and I think it's a much more, I guess, alpha approach, for lack of a better term. Hey, you know, I was thinking about what I said or what I did or whatever. I don't like the way I handled that, so I'm not going to in the future.
Mm-hmm. Or as I told you guys,
it's all about frames, like how you.
What's that, Rusty?
I was going to say it's all about frame. It's where you're coming from. You know, are you apologizing or saying you're sorry to basically manipulate or change that person's, you know, your wife's view of you to get goodwill, or are you taking accountability for something that you did that was not up to snuff? You know, you say, hey, you know, just like us saying, hey, I screwed up, that didn't come out right, that was not what I should have said, and that's not something I'm gonna do again. So it comes down to a perspective of frame. You know, why are you apologizing? Are you taking accountability, or are you trying to win brownie points, if you will?
Yeah, no, and I think that there's two reasons to apologize. Either I failed God's standard or I failed my standard. The end.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great framework. Hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah, everybody likes to talk about when somebody sinned against them or when they sinned against somebody else. You know, how do you feel about that? I look at Psalm 51. David has this comment where he says, and this is the context, I guess, is that he is just finished sleeping with Bathsheba, murdering her husband, and his best friend, Uriah, was one of David's mighty men. He sends him to the front lines and has him killed so that he can cover up the adultery. And then he ends up, turns out Bathsheba's pregnant and the baby just dies. David is a total mess, right? So he's killed one man, he's committed adultery with a woman, and he's gotten his baby killed. And after all of this, in Psalm 51, he says, against you, you only, Lord, have I sinned. And that's something that, you know, everybody takes that as an interesting sentiment, but it still comes to the conclusion that ultimately, oh yeah, well, I can still sin against somebody else if I call them names or if I hurt them or do something. That's a sin against them, right? But the way that I look at this is that it's all a matter of standards and who you live up to and abide by, right? So if my son, I were to hit his sister, has he sinned against her, right? Or if a husband hits his wife, is the sin against his wife? And I'm a lawyer, right? And so I've handled domestic violence cases before on a number of occasions. And I will tell you, just because the wife lets him off the hook doesn't mean the state will. And do you know why? Because the state says this is not a crime against her, it is a crime against the state. She is the victim, but the crime is against the state, and the state has an obligation to protect it. And in the same way, in my son, if he hits his sister, you know, it's my rule, don't hit your sisters, right? And so that's a rule that I set up for my household that he has violated. My daughter has no right to claim and make up a rule for him that he has to follow. And therefore, he's not beholden to her rules or expectations. So when he hits her, it's not a sin against her or her expectations. It's a sin against me even though she happens to be the victim. And in the same way, when your wife thinks that you have done her wrong, you are not beholden to her expectations over your life. You are beholden to the standards that you set, like I said, or the standards that God sets for you. And when you've done anything wrong, it's God's forgiveness that you seek, not hers. So with that in mind, I commented before, as I told you guys earlier, I had this conversation with my wife, and as we were in the midst of talking, there was a point where she had commented, I don't know how things got this way, but, I realized I was acting disrespectful toward you today, and I really shouldn't have done that. And so in trying to explain things, and there's more context to the conversation as to why I brought it in this way. I would never enter into, her being apologetic and me flipping tables against my own interest unless there's context to do so. And in this case, there was. And so my response was to say, for the first 7 years of our marriage, I really was not leading you properly. I did not set clear boundaries, and you thought it was okay to treat me this way and talk to me in the way that you just did. And even though you've gotten a lot better about it, I haven't seen this happen for years even. But to some degree, I had gone through a period of time where I was not leading you properly. That's my responsibility. Yes, I'm now dealing with some of the consequences of that. I also see that you've gotten better about it. Let's keep making improvement and move on. And so it's not so much an apology for what was going on in the past as much as it is saying, hey, I'm taking responsibility for the fact that I did not live up to what God had assigned me to.
It's owning it.
Exactly. Own your crap.
Nice. But, I heard somebody say somewhere, it was on Chateau Hartista, you only get 2 apologies in life. Sounds like with what you said, that might be possible.
I will say, if you're ever before a judge, you better believe you should apologize, period. The legal system will require it.
Yes. Oh, the caveats. Yes.
Mm-hmm. But that's because the judge has authority over you. Never have a problem apologizing to someone who actually has authority over you. When it's not to somebody with authority over you, but who is under you in authority, it's a different context.
That makes sense, yeah.
So, all right, we're going to go ahead and wrap up there, and I will look forward to chatting with you guys all soon.
All right.
Cool.
Cheerio,
Take
guys.
it easy.